I realized he wasn't sober, for lack of a better word, before I realized he was naked. So this story is from shortly after I was married, and me and my wife do everything together, and we do a lot of outdoor off-road stuff. And at the time, my off-road outdoor stuff was ATVs. So I had a Honda 400EX, and all my friends had 400EXs. So one of my friends was in town, and I really wanted to show them this ghost town that I'd recently found. The problem I had is I've only been to this place once, and it's about 100 miles out on the Arizona Strip from the Utah side. And I had been asleep for some of that trip and riding in the back seat of my father-in-law's vehicle. But I thought I could find it again. Like, how hard could it be? How big could the Arizona Strip be? So we ended up turning too early and getting off from the cliffs. So the way the geology is there's these big, they call them the Grand Cliffs because they're big, and they go all the way down to the Grand Canyon. They end at a place called Snap Point, which is an overlook where you can basically see South America. We were supposed to stay on top of the Grand Cliffs and then get to this mine site, but we went way early. Remember, we're dealing with like 90 to 100 miles of dirt road, and it's remote. There's no cell phone. You're not calling and asking directions or anything. So we dropped off of this, and we're in the bottom, and then I realized that that's where we were. We actually met a rancher, and he had a paper map, and I was able to figure out where we were, and I said, this is okay. We can drive up the Grand Wash, and at the top of the Grand Wash is the Grand Gulch Mine. So I was familiar enough to know that. I think there was 8 of us, 8 four-wheelers. We unloaded, and we were heading off there, and we were behind schedule now. So we were kind of feeling a little like, oh, we've got to get through this. And this particular part of the desert was Joshua trees. It was fairly flat. Little rolling hills, and it was sandy and gravelly. And that's perfect for sport quads. So we headed off across there as fast as we could maintain control. We were headed to the Grand Wash, and we could see it off there at a distance, and I was leading out. Then I start noticing a trail of transmission fluid. It's bright red, and I can see it. And that right there is unusual because we are way, way out here, and we didn't expect to see anybody where we're at. Like, the Arizona Strip is, I've said this before, it got me in a lot of trouble on my channel. I said, the Arizona Strip is the most remote area of the lower 48. And then I asked the question, what does lower 48 mean to my crew? And they just stood there, and I said, nobody knows. And so now the whole world thinks I don't know what the lower 48 is. It's very, very remote, and there's nothing out there. Whatever gas station you fueled up at is the closest gas station to you, no matter how far away from it you drive. You're not going to get closer to anything else because you'll hit the Grand Canyon and you're done. So I'm following this trail of transmission fluid, and it's going where we're going. It's consistent, but I've been following it for maybe 1.5 miles or 2 miles at this point, and I'm starting to do some math. And there's not very many vehicles that have enough capacity to go much further than that. And we start to get into the rolling foothills before we get into the canyon and the cliffs there. And I come around this turn, and I almost hit a guy. And he's not very tall, and he's got a bike. And let me set up the scene here. It took me a minute, like a couple seconds, to realize I was talking to a man that was completely naked. Because he's standing by his bike, and he's got his shorts, and they're like silk shorts, like athletic shorts. He's got a hold of them on his right there. He's got a purse around, like a satchel, but it's a women's purse, and he's got a piece of twine, like baling twine, tied to it as for the strap. And he is tan. He is tan everywhere. He's a human raisin. He's also not with it. I realized he wasn't sober, for lack of a better word, before I realized he was naked. I also noticed, strapped on his bike, he's got about a 10-inch fixed blade knife. And he's got it wired or tied to the lower bar on the bike. I'm trying to make a decision here, like, what's going on? I just decided, like, this guy's out here doing whatever he does, and he's probably going to be okay. Like, he looks like he knows what he's, like, this isn't the first time he's been out here. I'm not too worried, but I do warn him. I said, there's 8 more four-wheelers coming. And I'm surprised he can't hear them because we've all got loud pipes on our bikes and like our quads. He puts his shorts back on, but he's not. He's not doing well. But I just said, you shouldn't be in the middle of the road. You should be a little bit to the side. So then I continued on up about a quarter mile. And when I got there, there was a blue Buick. And it was just wedged in the rocks. It was as far as it could have gone. The hood was up. There was a jump box on the battery. The car's just been gone through. Glove box open, stuff. But there is hundreds, if not thousands, of live rounds of 22s and hundreds of rounds of 44s. And they're just all over in the car. They're on the floor. They're on the seats. They're on the dashboard. They're on the back seat. The VIN number's been all scratched. He took a screwdriver or something, maybe that knife, and scratched the VIN number. He took the license plates and stuff. But the engine's still warm. Like, this just barely happened. But he probably got to that point. The transmission quit about the same time he hit the rocks. And then he kept starting, and I don't know, the battery went dead. So the rest of my crew gets there. And the reason I mentioned Jamie at the first is Jamie didn't come with us because she was at home with a 2-week-old baby. So, and she's bummed because these friends are her friends also, and she loves this area. And this is relevant. Coming up, I'm going to get in big trouble because of a misunderstanding that I can't explain. We have a little powwow there. What are we going to do? Everybody was like, who was that guy? Did you see that guy? And one of the other members of our group had talked to him, and he had asked him for water. And so he said, our truck is about 3 miles down this road. There's a cooler full of water in the back of it. And I remember saying this. I said, he's going to be okay because I guarantee you this isn't the first bad decision he's ever made. And I don't think he's going to die today. And also I'm thinking, I've got this whole crew of people that have never seen what I'm about to show them. And we're going to do this big loop from the Grand Gulch Mine to the Savannah Mine, come down the Savannah Trail. Breathtaking trail. So we decide that, well, he's got water. There's shade at the truck. There's no shade anywhere else, but there's shade at the truck. We're about 10 o'clock in the morning at this point. So we decide to continue our trail. And we go to the Grand Gulch Mine. It's a really neat mine. There's 2 1927 white trucks, like white brand, white trucking. And these trucks, the rear axle is bolted straight to the frame. The front axles have leaf springs. One of the trucks has been picked apart, but the other one looks like you could get it running and drive it out. And this is far enough out. The partiers haven't been out there. There's no tagging. There's no bullet holes. There's no trash. It's a neat ghost town that hasn't been destroyed. So we check that out, eat our lunch, and then we go to the Savannah mine, and that's a mine we can go down in. It's a hard rock copper mine. It's not very big. I've been in it. Well, by that time, this is my second time going in it. While we were there, when we were coming out, a Jeep Safari was coming up with Peterson's off-road camera crew. And so we stopped to talk to them, and they're like, our whole day's shot. We were gonna, because it's starting to get a little bit dark. They were doing the same loop we were doing, but backwards. And they really wanted to show the Grand Wash, because that's a really gnarly trail. It's a really gnarly Jeep trail. The Savannah Trail is just beautiful scenic, and then the other one is extreme rock crawling. But they were losing their light, and the whole shot was messed up. And they said this morning, when we were coming across the desert down there, we came across a blue Buick, and a guy was waving a gun and had a woman duct taped up, like her mouth and her hands and her ankles, and a big German Shepherd dog was laying on the hood bleeding unconscious. And he pulled his gun out, and they said the second he brandished his weapon, he had 9 guns pointed at him from the Jeep guys. He jumped in the car and drove off, and she was leaning up against it, and the dog fell off, and he just took off into the desert. So they radioed in and got life flight there to pick up the woman and the dog, and they both survived. Like, I'll tell more at the end of the story, but just so you know now, so you don't get worried, they both survived. So they're like, that put us 2 hours behind schedule, or 3 hours, or however long it put them behind schedule. So we're like, oh, well, we met him. And then now I'm panicked. We've got a fugitive that's desperate. He's got a 44 in that purse, and he's waiting for us at our truck. We're thinking about this, and we're like, we've got to get back. Well, we're dropping down into the lake. I call it the Lake Mead Basin. I don't know what the real proper name is. So up where we were at 7,000 feet, and the temperature was nice up there. It was in the 70s up there. But when we dropped down in the Lake Mead Basin, we're basically sea level, and it's 110 degrees down there. It's late afternoon now. It's like 4 or 5 o'clock. And as I'm riding across there and just getting furnace blasted from the wind, I'm like, that guy never made it to our truck. He wouldn't be able to ride his bicycle through the sand and the gravel, and it's 3 miles, and he was dehydrated and disoriented, and I'm just like, there's no way he didn't make it to our truck. I just really felt that strongly. I made an executive decision. The most level-headed, strongest guys are gonna go ahead, and we're gonna find this guy, and we'll act non-threatening when we see him, and hey, let's help you get out of here, kind of. That's what we're gonna do. And so me and my friend Sheldon, who's linebacker build, we found him, and he hadn't made it to the truck. So there's these water troughs out there. They run cattle out there. They have these windmills. If you see the windmills, and they put the water in these troughs, and they're full of mosquito larvae and algae, and he's been drinking water out of that. So we found him there. He was naked again, put his clothes on, but he was now missing his bike and the knife, but he still had his purse. We're like, hey, jump on the four-wheeler, and as he jumped on the four-wheeler, I grabbed his purse, and he was desperate to get that purse, but it wasn't going to happen. Sheldon took off with him, and he had to grab on. And I know it wasn't real, but in my mind, the guy's hanging on to Sheldon, flapping in the wind, because he just took off. So I got the purse, and in the purse, there was no 44. So he ditched the 44 out there somewhere. But the 22 was, and it's a 22 revolver. It was a 5-shot, and there was 1 shot spent in there. And I'm just putting 2 and 2 together. I think he shot the dog with that, with the 22. So what I did was I took all the bullets out, and I checked the purse. And the purse was full of registration, license plates, just insurance cards, like that kind of stuff. There was no more bullets in there. I knew he didn't have any ammo on him or anything. I knew he had his Tevas and his shorts. That's all he had. And so I just took the bullets out and put those in my pocket. I just put the gun back in there. When we arrived and gave him back his purse, the first thing he did was check the gun for bullets, and he just deflated. And so now we've got like a 4-hour ride out of here with this guy. And we decided to go to Mesquite because that's where he's from. And we've learned from the Jeep guys that there's an APB out on this guy. We decided to go there. It's about the same distance to get back to St. George from where we were. And then we're trying to make a decision on what we're going to do. And me and my friend decided, hey, why don't we just drop him off at a gas station and then call the police and tell him where he is? But the truck behind us decided to call the police and have them wait for us and pull us over. So here's another thing. So now we're finally getting into cell phone service. And what we did is so Sheldon was driving the truck. His girlfriend was in the middle seat. This guy was here. And then me and my buddy Jordan were in the back seat, ready to just choke him out if he did anything. So, and a lot of people don't realize that if you pick up somebody sketchy and you're worried about it, put them in the front seat and put your buddies in the back seat. The back seat has control of that vehicle at this point. They have control of the driver and whoever's in the front seat. So think about it. So we're rolling into town, and the trailer we have has no taillights. And it's starting to get dusk. And when we were crossing the bridge into Mesquite there's 3 police cars just sitting there. Kind of like maybe they would be doing a small town where they're all just kind of talking. And I'm like, we are going to get pulled over. And I'm so dense that I'm not thinking that they're there for this guy. I'm thinking we're about to get a ticket for no taillights. So sure enough, we pass them, and boom, one of them lights us up and pulls us over. And he comes to the passenger door and he says, first thing out of his mouth, the reason I pulled you over is you don't have any lights on your trailer. And I'm like, oh man. And then he kind of looks around and he says, I'm going to need everybody out of this vehicle right now. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, oh, they're for him. And they did, and it was bad boys, bad boys. What you gonna do? They down on his face on the sidewalk, handcuffs, and they don't care about us at all. Like, they turned their backs on the rest of us, and they're interrogating him, asking him who owns the purse, and he's like, "It's not mine." And then there's like 8 witnesses there. It's definitely his. So we told them the story, and we had to write it out. We all had to fill out one of those statements. So imagine how long this statement was. We're just like writing a novel here. I abbreviated mine, got my pocket knife out, cut. So the trailer plug had been drug off. It's a farm trailer. I cut the wire that went to the license plate light, stripped back all the wires, found the one that goes to the tail lights. I'm twisting them together. This young cop comes up and he says, "That was really a good idea to unplug the trailer lights to give us a reason to pull you over." Because we were discussing why we were going to pull you over. And I'm like, all part of the plan. Twisted that together. Yeah, so at least we had taillights to go home. And we found out from them that the woman was okay. She was in the hospital recovering. She was dehydrated. Pretty much that was the only injury she had. And the dog survived. So they got it to the vet, and the dog's doing well. So it was her dog, and I don't know what relationship she had to him, but it was a happy ending to a crazy story for us. On the ride home, he never stopped talking for that 4 hours. And it was interesting, his perspective of what happened, because he says, "I came out camping with my girlfriend, but she ran off with some Jeep guys." And he said, "It's over. We are over. I'm not taking her camping ever again." I'm like, "You're probably not." So yeah, he talked about that a lot. He talked about the government and how the government owed him money. And he talked about his car, how he's got to go figure out how to get his car because the battery's dead. It's also out of gas and transmission's cooked, but in his mind, the battery was dead. So he did remember that. Yeah, he pretty much talked the whole time, and he didn't really repeat himself. But I don't remember all the conversation because it was it wasn't coherent. There wasn't a beginning and a middle. There was no story arc and an end. It was just babble the entire way. He was compliant. Once he realized that he did not have the upper hand, he was very, very compliant and easy to get along with. And I wrote a whole poem. I can't find it, but on the Arizona Strip, a riding we did go, we spied a naked man upon his bicycle. I asked him very kindly not to take a chance, for there were women in our group. Could he please put on his pants? When we were coming down the mountain into Mesquite and I got in service, my phone had several texts from my wife asking how things were going. And so I called her. I'm like, "Hey, we're almost to Mesquite. We're going to stop and hit a buffet, and then I'll be home." Well, what she thought we did was come back to St. George because she's capable of going to a buffet. So she thought we came to St. George and then decided to go to a buffet in Mesquite and leave her. And I can't tell her. I don't want to alarm this man as to what's going on, because at this point we were planning to just drop him off at a gas station and then call the police. So I can't say, "Hey, we've got a fugitive from justice here. We're going to drop him off at a thing." We actually came to Mesquite. So I'm like, we drove to Mesquite. I thought I was explaining that because in my mind we had, from the launching point, we drove to Mesquite, and she keeps thinking that we hit St. George and drove to Mesquite. So she was quite upset. And then after he was arrested, I called Jamie to tell her the real story, and now she doesn't believe it. It's an unbelievable story. She's like, "Are you just telling me this so that I'm not mad at you for ditching me and hanging out with your friends?" And I'm like, "No, this is all real." I wish you could have been here. You would have loved to live through this.
I'm at the Lars Anderson Auto Museum, home of America's oldest car collection, and they are holding a sweepstakes where one of you is going to win this Porsche 992. You can enter at the link in the description below, and you will have an amazing car, but much more importantly, you'll be helping keep America's car culture alive. The Lars Anderson Auto Museum is the hub of New England car culture, and that is why every week here on the grounds, there's something amazing happening. So if you're in the Boston area, come say hey, and either way, enter to win this thing because it's awesome.